All right, we're back with episode 2 of the Visionary Minds podcast. Second guest here is Curtis Mandrake, formerly known as Wheelie McSpinchair, I believe was the thing, where he kind of became a legend, like reincarnation of Rick James. So welcome back, Curtis, or Wheelie, or whatever you want to go. I'm going to call you Curtis because that's your name right now.
Sure, that's good.
All right. So yeah, welcome in. I guess let's just start in with some of the central topics of the podcast. As far as what's your experience with psychedelics? What are some substances you've tried, and just generally your experience with psychedelics?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of different avenues there. One, yeah, I can talk about my personal experience with psychedelics, but my introduction to the Terence McKenna group.
Right.
It's kind of like unrelated to that, but I'm happy to
Go
explore
ahead and start there, because that's true. Because Terence McKenna Experience is a foundational thing for the podcast. It's an inspirational.
Yeah, oh yeah, sure. So my older brother Chad, who was on Facebook for a while, he's no longer on Facebook. I had been talking to him about this book that I read called God, I don't remember. It was about the spirit molecule book,
DMT, the spirit.
The DMT, the spirit molecule. And he said, if you're into that kind of thing, there's this Facebook group that you should really, get involved in, and called the Terence McKenna Experience. And I was not on Facebook at the time. I joined Facebook just for that purpose, to join the group. And I've been part of the group for, I guess, since 2012 or so. I'm just going to pull my earphones out here a little bit because I can hear myself. And I love the experience. I mean, there's people there that are, more scholarly, more academic types. People have done their reading. There are people there that have experienced a lot of different, chemicals. There are people there that are on just a spiritual journey or a philosophical journey. It's like there's a huge spectrum of people there. That's what kept me there. It really got me focused.
Right.
And but my personal, what I had to bring to that group was not my personal reading, because I'm not that well read. I'm not that much of an academic. I'm someone who's had some experience with LSD, with mushrooms, with cannabis, a little bit of DMT, not successfully. But that's like most people. Everyone has their own mix of what they've had in the world, going back to high school and before, whatever, and what they're doing now. So, but my persona and my personality, I ended up being sort of a jokester, kind of like this guy who would always throw a different idea into a thread, never too serious. I also tried to be
usually have some real something there. There's usually it's in a lighthearted way, but there's usually a nugget of wisdom in what you're saying too.
Hopefully so, yeah. But I was very careful not to, because you see so much negativity in these groups where people try to cut each other down and say, "Oh, you're stupid at this, that." I never tried to get into any of that. So eventually I became an admin, and that's a great group too. There's a separate admins group, and although I'm not as active in the groups in terms of the topics that come up and be engaged in convo, I do watch, I do listen, and I am engaged in the admins group. So that's where I am now. I did rage quit the group a couple of times.
A time-honored tradition of the Terence McKenna.
Of course. If you haven't rage quit once, you're not a true member.
What are you doing? Yeah, you're just posing at this point.
So that's one thing about the group. It's very forgiving, and in the sense that if you come around, that's great. But if you're a total asshole, you're not going to last long.
Well, that's one of the things I really like about the group is the fact that, I feel like in most groups, if you're an asshole, they'll justify it like, oh, well, you should just listen to what they're saying, and, it's only your ego that's offended and this and that. Whereas in the Terence McKenna Experience, we as an admins have collectively decided, no, if you're an asshole, that's not cool. We don't accept it in the group, and you're going to be kicked. Like, that's it.
Right.
So we help, because of that, we've kind of affected an atmosphere where, yeah, you can disagree, of course, all that, but don't be an asshole about it. And if you are, you're going to be kicked, most likely,
Right. And that's why we have the admins group where we say, like, if you disagree so much with the tenets of or the organization of this group, we invite you to join the admins group, and we will not give you a hard time. We'll welcome you in. You can be part of the dialogue, the discussion. There's no guarantee that what you have to say or bring will be embraced, but it might be. There's a lot of people who actually are in the admins group right now who started off as being like, firebrands or like difficult people in the group. And they came into the admins group and they're like, hey, you guys are listening to me. So now I have something to say. I have something to contribute. So
exactly, it's happened so many times where someone had their post deleted or something like that, and they came in the admin groups. They start off just raging. They're just ranting about this, that, this, that, and then the rest of the admins kind of respond reasonably and creates a dialogue. And by the end, they kind of calm down. They're like, all right, well, I see what you're saying, but this, and then we kind of reach a conclusion. And there's been a lot of good admins that started off being pissed off at the admins and coming in raging, and then in the end, they're actually a productive, good member.
I mean, I think it's because they're passionate. They're passionate about their ideas or the ways that their ideas get discussed. And so if they're brought into the admins group, if they're still that passionate and their ideas make sense, then they're a perfect fit. So they can be admins and regular members and continue on.
That's another unique thing. The admin group is really another thing that makes this community unique. I mean, I've never heard of anything like it in any other online groups. I mean, before Terence McKenna Experience, which was a major thing, I posted in kind of random forums online. I've always done that. I've always posted in forums online, and I actually didn't even use Facebook for quite a while. But then somehow or another, I started finding out about groups on Facebook, and Terence McKenna Experience ended up being the main one. And I got into that, and it's a really great community, and it's nice that in the one place, I like that there's a greater connection to who you actually are as a person. In online forums, it's totally detached. You just come up with the username, and that's just who you are. I like that there's somewhat of a connection to who you actually are, and there's just so many different types of groups that exist on the same place, and I really think the Terence McKenna Experience has done a great job. Like you said, there's so many different types of people. That's what makes it so unique. I've made a variety of friends through the group that you would categorize as different. There's different types of people, but they all fall under the umbrella of the Terence McKenna Experience.
And you can see how those people kind of like, if they don't want to argue with each other, they kind of rub up against each other, like through their comments a little bit, like because they know that, one guy's into, kind of the religious aspect. Other people are into the really philosophical aspect, some are into the chemical aspect, but they all kind of give room to each other. Not to say it happens all the time, because there are people that hit, butt heads all the time, and it becomes, we've seen that. But you asked about the groups, which I'm part of, but also my personal background. I'd just like to share a little bit about that, because some of your listeners may know me as, as Curtis or as Wheelie, or not know me at all, and that's kind of like how it is when anyone enters that group. But my earliest experiences were in high school with a little bit of LSD, a little bit of mushrooms, a little bit of cannabis. I never really latched on to cannabis because I felt like my mind was so creative. I'm like, what do I need that for? At the time. And it wasn't until about 8 years ago. I'm 52 years old. So it wasn't until about 8 years ago that I fell into an opportunity to have cannabis around me, to have LSD around me, to have mushrooms around me. So there's almost a 40 years or so year gap, 45-year gap between my earliest experiences and now. And it's been maybe it's because I'm in the right point in my life to start exploring. It seems late, but I'm at the right point to explore the religious, philosophical, aspects of existence and what I'm doing.
Well, it's nice that you, because I guess stereotypically, as time goes on, people become more closed off and set in their ways. So it's interesting and a very good thing, I think, that as you've gotten older, you've actually become more open, and now you're like, okay, well, let me try some of the stuff that might open my mind beyond where it has been before. So I think that's a great thing,
Exactly, and I think what happens is, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I'm guessing that just like everyone else, like you go through a pattern. You go to high school or college, You
Yeah.
get married, your focus is on a marriage or kids, your career, your retirement, saving for retirement, and that's all where all your creative energy goes. And
Yeah.
it kind of takes you along for most of your life,
Yeah.
until you start, like, your kids start moving out of the house or start thinking about retirement, and then you're like, well, what's left for me? What am I all about? So I kind of like had the opportunity to do all that stuff, but also
Yeah.
think about, like, even at 50, 52 years old, maybe I can explore some of that
Yeah.
and do some deep dives. That's, in my mind, that's where it is. It's where
Well,
the shadows are.
yeah, well, it sounds like you've done it really in the perfect way. That's ideal, and it brings to mind, because it makes sense of itself. And I know that in the Hindu tradition, they have this, they break your life down into different stages, basically. And when you become an adult, you're adult through middle age, basically. In their outline, you focus on things of the world, family, career, this, that, and then as you get kind of established in that, like you said, maybe your kids are on their own, this or that, then you reach into a new stage, and in their system, that's when you start really focusing on spirituality and stuff. That's your opportunity because you've already done the worldly stuff, kind of, and you have
Right, right, right.
space open to it. So, that it's sort of built into the life cycle itself, and obviously, you've taken that opportunity in the best way, in my opinion.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I took a lot of risks. I did not have any. Being at that age, it was like 40. Was it 43 or 45? Like, where do I get LSD at the age of 45? Where do I get this new wonderful thing called DMT, which has been
Right.
around forever, but I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Where do I get these mushrooms? So I had to explore, because my background is computer science. I'm a system engineer by trade. That's what I'm
Yeah.
paid to do. That's what pays my bills. Um, how do I get this stuff? And so this dark market, appeared, and there are ways to do that. And I've talked about this in the group sometimes too, because we don't talk about sourcing in the
Yep.
groups. But I do feel bad when people come in there because they're genuinely curious. They've read the books. They've kind of come to a point in their life where they're ready for this. But they look around them and they're like, where do I get this? I can't just go to a festival. Look at
Yeah.
me. Can I go to a festival and, like, hey man,
Hey guys, where's the
hook me
LSD?
up? They would, like, they'd like narc me out so bad. So, so I found a way to get through that. I learned about encryption. I learned about Bitcoin. Learned about the markets, and that's how I got back into it. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not saying that's the only way
Well, it's
now.
such a great opportunity. You're right. I mean, it's opened up the potential more than anything ever has, I think. And
Yeah, I
there's this
mean,
idea. There's this idea out there where people think like, "Oh, when you're ready, it'll find you." I just don't agree
I'm
with that.
sorry.
I
You
don't
can
agree
you
with
can be
that.
ready till the day you die, and it may not find you.
Exactly. Or
you
you
know,
might just be born into a situation where they're just there, and you might
yeah,
not be mentally ready, but they're going to be offered to you just because of your circumstance. I mean, I
right.
don't
If
really.
you have a few $100 and you know how to buy Bitcoin, you can get a 100 tab sheet to your mailbox in a couple of weeks.
Well, that's what's so great about it is it's really opened up the door. Anyone who's interested and is just willing to kind of take the steps they need to can
Right.
get whatever they want to get.
Yeah, and there are sites out there. I don't want to list any sites because we're not promoting them, but
I don't want to get
there
too
are
specific.
there are plain regular websites you can go to that explain the whole process. And I don't want anyone who really needs this for spiritual or personal reasons to be struggling with how do I get this, and then going out on the street and, like, getting, like, shit or getting
Yeah.
something that's
Well, it's
subpar.
really safer than just buying from some random person.
Right,
Really.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
And
that's that part of it.
so I really feel like psychedelics are to me they are a spiritual chemicals basically. I mean they offer you the opportunity to have legitimate personal spiritual experiences that many times really aren't open to people without psychedelics. You know, and
Well, even as a test or a trial or a dipping your toes in the water, they should be there for people to try. I think.
exactly, and that's what I just they are spiritual substances, but they open something up in you. Like I said, I don't agree with the Puritanism of like you have to take it in a specific context. Because I would bet if you looked into the majority of people when they first took psychedelics, it wasn't like, okay, this is a spiritual sacrament. I'm gonna have like the perfect mindset and this or that. They just took it. And that opened their mind to a lot of possibilities they might have never been open to if it wasn't for the
Right,
psychedelic.
right. No, I agree, and I hear, and I want to be respectful of those people in the groups who do regard this stuff as a sacrament. I mean, I
Yeah.
grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, and I understand the sacrament. I understand the sanctity of it.
Yep.
But in my mind, this is something that if you want to go for a beach holiday and share a few taps with your friends, and everyone is prepared, they know what they're going into, they've done all their kind of reading and research or conversation about it, and they're willing to do this, then I don't care if they're going to stand up there and dance to music for the whole weekend or not. They don't have to sit down and pray and have a ceremony. I
Well,
mean,
plus, I mean, there's the basic. I mean, it's really a spiritual idea that spirituality permeates the mundane.
right,
It's sort of the sort of absolute divide between our life and spirituality is sort of a false dichotomy. I mean, how could there be a genuine spirituality which is totally separate from our life? That doesn't really make sense. And so even if it might not be stereotypically spiritual, if it illuminates just a regular experience, I mean, that has spiritual value. It's like Terence McKenna talked about, one of his key concepts was the felt presence of immediate experience, you
right.
know, and
And
that's the
nobody can deny that. I'm sorry, no one can deny that. And if whatever it is that you go to or do or come back from, if you can say that and you mean it sincerely, then there's no rules broken. You know.
Yep, and that's why, you talked about as far as being an intellectual or like scholarly or whatever, there's obviously is value in that, but there's also value in someone who has these experiences and is willing to openly and honestly relay them. I find that to be a pretty significant sort of lack in the psychedelic community for the most part, is I just feel like people are not that open about their actual experiences. And that's as far as the felt presence of immediate experience. That means what you actually experienced, like the literal experience that you had. And I think it would be good as the community of psychedelic takers if there was an openness to like, this is what I experienced. I'm gonna say it in as raw, unfiltered
But
as I can.
but do you think that people are holding back, or do you think it's just naturally and it's just naturally hard to convey that
Well,
experience?
here's what I think. I think I think there's an element of self-consciousness to it, and then in addition to self-consciousness, they have the underlying message that they can fall back of oh, you can't say it in words, it can't be described in words, it's beyond language, and they can fall on that. So it's like I find people will almost start to say it, and then they start feeling self-conscious, like, oh, this maybe sounds stupid, and then like, well, words can't explain it really, it's beyond words. And everyone, that's a reliance people can just fall back on. Well, it's beyond words, and it is. I'm not saying that it's easily describable in language, but we could do better than we do if we really tried.
Well,
But
it does take hard work to describe any experience, not just the psychedelic, but it takes hard work to describe what it was to go get your coffee at the coffee shop, right? I
yeah,
mean, you have to have the willingness and desire to describe that experience, but also like, you know, um, I don't know, you have to have some people have more tactile, ways to work with words, or they're better at expressing themselves, or I don't know. It's very tough because
yeah,
we have people all over the spectrum that are experiencing these things.
yeah, and yeah, I just think that, and that's what Terence McKenna, a concept that he talked about is that words sort of precede perception, basically. Like we have to have a linguistic map or a linguistic model of explaining something to even experience it in the first place. So he talked about psychedelics as like linguistic catalysts, where in order to explain the experience, if we're going to try it all, we're forced to use language in a way that it hasn't been used before. And if we really use language in that way and we integrate the necessary components to describe the experience, it sort of opens our mind up to a greater realm of experience because we've sort of laid the foundational roads through language that kind of opens our minds to experiencing it at all.
Right. So, given that, though, do you think this is a really interesting point that you raised? This idea of like having the language beforehand. What about native cultures that don't have our language or that don't have any kind of written language? You know, they experience psychedelics, you know, as part of their day to day than we do. What do you think about that? Is it
Well, I think in a sense, I mean, it depends because obviously it depends on if they have what language they have and the specifics of their language. But like native people, I mean, if you look at when people describe shamanism and their practices and the experiences, a lot of times it involves like straight up supernatural shit supposedly happening, and you're like, well, that couldn't have really happened, right? And I feel personally, what a lot of its language and belief and expectations, I think our culture has closed ourselves off to experiences that we find to be irrational based on a materialistic bend. And if you don't have that cultural expectation, and because it's kind of built into our language, a lot of that stuff is built into our language as far as subject-object dichotomy and a lot of stuff like that. And if you don't have the linguistic structure and the inherited beliefs and assumptions, I think that your mind is much more open to out of the ordinary experiences. And I think our brains have been conditioned to think, oh, well, it's impossible that this whole range of experiences could happen. And because of that, I think we're much less likely to experience. The fact of being open to it makes it more likely to happen, I think.
well? Because I often think about like groups like you and me and the TMK,
Yeah.
Terence McKenna group, and like you know these. If we could go back in time to these native folks living in New Mexico or southwestern United States, you know, and experiencing psychedelics with them, it's like they don't have written history, have written language like we know it. It's all oral history. Can we
Yeah.
have commonality? Like, can we sit there and if we could communicate at least between each other, would there be some common experience with
Well,
psychedelics?
you wonder the written word. I mean, I sometimes wonder if the written word, just the fact of writing word, is a greater like concretization that it limits it more. I mean, a lot of there's a lot of ancient languages. They have the idea of a sacred language. There's Hebrew and Sanskrit are both considered like sacred, quasi divine languages basically. And a lot of the origins of it were more spoken, and a lot of ancient languages were more primarily spoken. And there's something about solidifying the language through writing and through letters and the whole structure of it that I think it allows us to be more practical, and it allows a lot of practical benefits. But that it's all a process of concretizing the linguistic structure, which inherently has a closing off of it, and I think you become more closed off to the realm of possibilities. And you're right that there's definitely shared experience. I mean, that's the question is what about shared experiences versus the linguistic representation?
Mm-hmm.
I just think we filter the experience through our language to some degree. I mean, I don't think you can completely separate language from the experience because how do we understand experience except through our linguistic
Right.
description?
And obviously cultural. I mean, and the other thing that comes up in the group as a topic of conversation is, what do you think about Western folks like you and me
Yeah,
spending $2,700 to go down to Peru or wherever and
yeah,
going on these these vision quests with a local, what you would hope is a local shaman
yeah,
taking the ayahuasca, and this is something they've done internally as part of their culture for centuries, for dealing with whatever ills their culture deals with, and then
Yeah.
we're introducing our Western philosophies and our illnesses, which maybe were never meant to be solved by that. I don't know. I think it's kind of, if you can get past the possibility there's a whole market of, scams or whatever. If you can get to a real shaman, a real village, and they're willing to treat you, is that a real thing that people come back from feeling
Yeah.
better?
Well, I mean, first of all, that's a sort of dichotomy that we deal with because a lot of people have the attitude of only taking it in the traditional context. That's like the only valid way of doing it, and it's just kind of contradictory because I find many of the people who say it's only valid if you do it in the original context, very often they're the same people who say, I mean, because it is true. I mean, there's articles about the negativity of ayahuasca tourism because I guess certain plants are being like driven down.
Decimated, yeah.
Yeah, so but if you're going to acknowledge that as a valid problem, like, oh, all these ayahuasca retreats might be having certain negative environmental effects, then you can't disempower taking it in a different context because those are your options, you know?
Right. Yeah, I can see that definitely.
So you mentioned, growing up in a Christian environment. That's one of the things that I like about you because it differentiates you. I like that's one of the things I respect about Terence McKenna a lot is that one of the things I respect about him more than anything is that he said what he thought and he didn't filter it. He didn't say, well, and try to like acknowledge the other side's arguments or whatever. He said what he thought, and that was that. He didn't care, and he so often he upset the expectations. He said things that directly contradicted what the typical spiritual expectation is for the person to say, and certainly, and just like me, just like you, it's a completely different thing from religious fundamentalism. But I appreciate that you are open to more traditional spiritual systems and the value that they might have for an individual. And I think that's become it's become unpopular, I guess, in that kind of context, is to totally disavow all traditional
Yeah, thank
spirituality.
you. And I think we've all seen different threads. We've evolved in threads in those groups for a long time. Where there are some folks, and I don't want to call out a particular type of post or type of person and say that they're being bad or wrong or that they're being closed-minded, but um, you do see like a trend of anti-religiousness,
Yeah,
whether it's anti-Muslim, anti-Christian, it's just anti across the board, as if religion is, and they will post memes and say, religion is the root of all evil in the world. Well, if there wasn't religion, there's plenty of other fucking evil in the world. Uh,
yeah,
and I think there's a misperception, and there's this idea people have about fundamental Christianity as being like that's what all Christianity is. It is not. There
yeah,
are and I've said this before. There are first of all, I grew up in late 60s, early 70s, Roman Catholic, pretty committed family, very committed family.
yeah,
And I went to a Catholic church, all Catholic upbringing, education all the way through high school, and um, the vibe that I was getting then, and maybe it was because it was late 60s, early 70s, kind of the transition from the beatniks to the hippie generations, all about social consciousness.
yeah,
My dad and my mom, even though my dad was at a certain point was well situated, we were going out there on the streets looking for furniture on the streets and the trash for poor folk. We invited people into our house even though we couldn't afford it. We were always welcoming people into our home, and it was like that's not anything you see when people criticize Christianity. That was like a very hippie kind of thing back in the
yeah,
70s. That's the kind of Christianity I grew up in,
yeah,
and apart from that, I don't look at it as being some lie that I was taught that I then had to extricate myself from.
yeah,
Really look at my Christianity as being a springboard. I've taken I've been in some very deep, dark dives down to the very depths of myself. That's where you want to go. You don't want to
Yep.
go where the unicorns and the rainbows are. You want to go where the shadows are.
Yep.
And that Christianity, those values were very strong down there. So you bring to it what you will, and and I'm not trying to rebuke those that criticize religion, but what I would say to them is, you believe in the strength of what you believe in. You believe in the LSD, you believe in the mushroom, you believe in, your meditation. But there are monks in France right now, at the age of 18 or 19, that decide after 6 months of trying it out to be poor and to live a life of silence for the rest of their lives, to pray for the world. And you may say, well, that's fucking stupid. What a waste of time. But you know what? That's more of a commitment than taking LSD and diving into the shadows. Honestly, it really is. It's like
Yeah, it's definitely more of a commitment, without a doubt. It's a lifetime commitment for a lot of those people.
Yeah, and I know that what I've said right now is maybe controversial, but we'll see that in the comments.
Right. Well, that's what, for me, I perfectly understand and appreciate where those people are coming from, because very often they grew up in a religious environment, or they had people around them that were really religious fundamentalists saying, oh, you can't do this, don't do that.
They beat it into them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so then, they reach a point where they say, fuck this, fuck religion, and they just rebel against it, and that makes total sense and is totally valid. My thoughts on it are that I almost don't think there's such a thing as a religion that's one thing, or even a sacred text that's one thing. It only has meaning relative to the individual who's saying it or interpreting it. I don't think it even has hardly any objective meaning apart from what the individual provides to it. So you have to
exactly. It's like a language in itself. It's a language to explain your own spirituality.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a concept that I've always found interesting as far as that goes. Is there's a concept of the idea of a sacred text, and more so than how people interpret the Bible, the Jews think of the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, and the Hindus think of the Vedas, which is maybe the most holy scripture, and they have this idea that the text is perfect, and it's like a reflection of a higher, it's like a holographic reflection of a higher divine reality, and so what that means is that it's not about, for fundamentalist religion as we think of it, it's about like, no, this literally happened. This is a story. This is history. This literally happened. But whereas if you really look into the idea of a sacred text, it's actually more than that. It's about analyzing at such a deep level. Why was this word used as opposed to another word? And you break down at such a deep level the structure of the sentence and why this word was used and this letter was used as opposed to another. And that defines the Jewish literary tradition, is like breaking down at a level you would not even imagine about, like, this. If you look in the original text, this letter is bigger than all the other letters in this word. So what does that mean? or like, this is the same phrase that was used here. So if you take this verse and you take that sentence, you can apply it to this one because it's the same phrase, and then that. So it's like, and I've just found I've grown out of taking a particular religion or religious text too seriously, but I can't deny that I found there to be something. It stimulates a part of your brain. I don't know, to analyze a text like that and to try to look that deeply into what exactly is being implied.
So coming out from the other side of it, it's given you something. It wasn't like a complete waste of time. It's sharpened your mind in some certain way, right?
Yeah, and then that's what I think there's something to. I think there's something to the original language that a scripture was written in. There's something, because that's what, for me, early when I was starting my path, which originally was religious, it was a lot of it involved the original Hebrew of the biblical text and trying to analyze that. And I found that there's a lot of meaning. If you look at the original language that these texts were written in, there's a lot of meaning in words that you're just not going to get if you read the English text. It's just not there in English, but it is there in the original. A classic, an example that I point to biblically that's super interesting to me is when we say God in a Christian context, we take it as like the Father, like a masculine deity. That's how people take it basically. But if you look at the most common word used for God in the Bible, it's Elohim. And if you break down what Elohim is, what it actually is, it's a masculine pluralization of a feminine singular term for divinity. So it's like saying goddess singularly, but then you change it to make it masculine and plural. So there's unity, plurality, masculinity, and femininity all in that word for God, which you're not going to get in the English word God. And to me, it lends itself to interpretation. So what does that mean? As far as I'm concerned, there's how I look at it is so when it says the feminine singularity, it's saying that there's a unified substrate to reality. There's this primordial matter or whatever that is when you talk about the all or the one, that's the unified feminine that is in the word, and then you take the masculine pluralization. That's basically the projection of the archetypes. There's archetypal forms of expression, and it's the fact of projecting outwards is the masculine. So, and that's all in the word Elohim. So that's an example of just analyzing it in the original language opens up so much more meaning than if you just read the word God.
Right, exactly. And I don't think any of those definitions of God would swing in the United States right now.
Yeah.
Because of the politics or whatever. But yeah, no, I hear you. It's great. That's great stuff.
Yeah, and as far as just the general, as far as, well, so I don't know, I might be making a mistake here. This is my tendency. I like to, if there's something that's commonly said that I don't really think is right, it's just my tendency to go after it. So this might be a mistake, but it's a common thought that people say, and there is a lot of value in it. Let me say up front, I'm not discounting that there's a lot of value and truth in it, which is that people say they don't believe anything. I don't believe anything. I'm not sure that that's even possible because
everybody believes something.
Exactly, because to even interpret your world, and that comes back to the Terence McKenna quote, reality is made of words, or the world is made of words, because to even interpret the world, you have to have this sort of semantic structure that you filter information and you interpret your environment. So that's basically a belief system. It's a mental map. It's impossible to get around the fact of having some kind of mental structure, beliefs.
Right. It's like David Foster Wallace, the writer, who has nothing to do with Terence McKenna at all. David Foster Wallace writes, he has a great speech where he goes, everybody believes something. Yeah. Everybody believes. You believe in the SUV, you believe in, whatever it is, everybody believes.
Exactly. You can't get around it. And that relates to the concept, well, as far as Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson, they talk about reality tunnels. And that alludes to the concept we all live in reality tunnels, which means we have these mental structures. We have predefined mental structures that we inevitably interpret and sort all of the information we receive into a pattern that's predefined, and that's our reality tunnel. We're already set. It's like we're on alert. We just look for cues that conform to our mental model that we already have, and that defines our reality tunnel, and that's basically chosen, so it's a belief system, basically. And John Lilly has an alteration. It's the same concept, I think, which is he talked about metaprogramming, which is he has this whole thing where he talks about the brain as being like a computer, basically, and you can break down everything about our experience basically in terms of a series of programs that define everything that we experience, basically, and metaprogramming is like hacking into that, particularly through psychedelics, and you go into those kind of deeper levels within the programming, and you see what it is, and you're able to alter some of those core beliefs or those core definitions or this or that, and then you can reprogram it, which changes the reality tunnel, which changes the experience.
Right. And what you're saying brings up an important kind of subject, and that is the intentions that people bring with them into the experience. And some people, me personally, I go into it with, kind of like a self-aid or self-exploration
Yeah.
motif, but other people go into it for other things. They're looking for God. They're looking for, satisfaction in life. They're looking for, personal physical health or emotional health. For me, it's very much like exploring my own inner psyche to figure out like what brings me to this point in my life.
Yeah.
So that kind of like parallels what you were saying.
Well, there's so many ways it can be used, and again, like you're saying, it kind of in many ways is defined by what you bring to it, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the set and setting of Timothy Leary. Your mentality going into it and your actual environment define the experience, basically.
Right, right. But I will also actually say that even in the groups, when people talk about set and setting, I'm a little
Yeah.
bit loose on that because, if you're having a challenge, whatever it is, I mean, and I can't say this is a blanket, go ahead for everybody, but part of the use of these tools is to help you solve problems. And
Yeah.
if you have no problems and everything's great in your life and you're perfectly in balance, I mean, it might be nice, but it's much better to get go into these tools with some problem you need to solve. And if
Hmm.
it's like a relationship issue or you know whatever's going on in your life that's not going right, it's
Yeah.
sometimes good, and you're trying to solve that problem, and you go into this. Sometimes you come out of it with not necessarily the solution, but a different approach to a possible solution.
Right.
So yeah, so I'm just saying that folks who have no issues in their life, it's like, why are you taking this? Other than for enjoyment, I guess.
Well,
No,
I
there's
think
nothing wrong with enjoyment, but
right, and I think that kind of ties into the a lot of psychedelic talk revolves around a sort of psychological usage and interpretation, and to some degree that contrasts a little bit with the spiritual. And the way I look at it is, and there's the alchemical term lead, which is like heavy, right? And I just think I think if we the issues that we have, we can't really pretend it doesn't exist. It's in our consciousness and it's heavy. So when you take a psychedelic, I think our issues are this heavy downward pulling force that if you haven't resolved those issues, it limits how far up you can go because you can't get around the down pull of these issues. And that's what you say as far as a deep dive into the shadow of the unconscious or whatever. That's saying that you can't avoid your internal issues. The only way you can possibly move past them is to directly confront them.
hmm
And I think through directly confronting the raw realities and our raw issues, if you're able to really confront it, I think it lightens you up, sort of,
yeah,
and for those higher transcendental experiences to come much more easily.
yeah, absolutely. And I've had experiences, and many, hopefully, some people who are listening to this right now have had similar experiences. But I've had experiences where I took LSD and I'm sitting there, you know, racked on the floor, sobbing, and thinking like, oh, I just wish this was over. I wish this was over. But like,
Yeah,
a few days later, you're like, that was the best experience of my life. Like you sweated out or you digested out some negative thing, and you thought
yeah.
it was at the moment. You thought it was like, this is I got some bad acid. But in fact, you got exactly what you asked for and exactly what you needed. You know what I mean?
Yep. Let me say it's something that John Lilly said. Well, there's a thing that he talked about a lot, as he talked about as a monumental thing for him, which he described as a guided tour of hell. And basically, he describes a psychedelic experience which he was like directly confronted with all of the negativity that he could almost possibly endure. It was all just thrown at him without any impediment, and he looked at that as a monumental experience. And he, or something I read him say recently, he talked about, he said, any experience you have of high energy, such as a psychedelic experience, you should confront with absolute awareness and non-resistance, whether it's positive or negative. Because the way he describes it was interesting, because I almost don't recall seeing anyone else describe it this way. He talked about how if you have what seems to be like a very negative experience, don't avoid it and try to interpret it positively or act like it's not real.
Yeah.
Confront it head on, and the way he described it is sort of in light of his brain as a computer model, which is that basically if you have a purely negative experience with awareness, basically your brain, your computer, creates an aversion to it, where it's like, oh, I've experienced that, and fuck that, I don't like that. And so in the future, if that starts to come on, your brain, it's like self-defense. It comes on. It's like, no, not that, not that, not that. And that's how he describes it, as burning negative karma, because and he describes what it means to burn negative karma is to directly experience the negativity and imprint in your subconscious like a programmed aversion to it, and then it's out of your experience, and you're able to actually remain more in the positive because of the fact that you had such a conscious experience of the negative.
No, that sounds. I've never heard it described that way, and I'm not aware of that author, but that's absolutely what I'm talking about. Like, you could resist that and say I had a bad trip, or you can embrace it and say, I was sobbing on the floor for 6 hours, and it took me 2 weeks to come back from that and think about it and integrate it, and best 6 hours I ever spent in my life was on that floor. I mean, it's you can't be looking for the unicorns and the rainbows. If
Exactly.
you're doing that, it's you're scratching at the surface.
Yeah, you're staying at the surface, and that's, again, all that negativity is just this down pulling weight, and you have to confront it.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to be stuck. You're never going to move past the original type or surface of experience if you don't confront. It's like psychology almost precedes spirituality.
Yeah. Well, you have to put yourself in a place where you're ready for that. I mean, and psychology is a big part of it.
Well, that's what's so interesting is so many of the foundational psychedelic people, like Timothy Leary is a prime example, where he was a Harvard professor of psychology, and because psychedelics originally, if you look, in the 50s and 60s when they were being introduced, that was the context, was, there's these psychological tools that will allow you to enact more change psychologically within like a few hours than you would have normally through like years of talk therapy.
Yeah.
And then out of that, again, that's as far as the experience can go beyond the original intention, because you may say, oh, it's just psychological, but in the end, you might experience something that goes a lot beyond pure psychology.
Right. And we can also talk about the. I'm sorry, I'm unplugging myself here. We can talk about the creative aspect of it. I know you are obviously, this is a creative endeavor, starting these podcasts. For me, I write poetry, and, there's a little bit of a debate or disagreement in the groups, but I drink alcohol, and I have, 2 or 3 cans of beer, and I smoke some marijuana, and I write. And that seems to me to be the magical mixture to help those ideas come onto the paper. Now, I don't know what it would be if you were to say, dude, Curtis, do this straight, without any chemicals. Let's see what comes out. Maybe I would be just as creative, but this works for me.
Well, it really flies against, people can say that, but it really flies against the reality if you look at the history of art and the great artists.
Yeah, right.
Most of them were doing drugs and drinking, and they were doing the whole thing.
These were not Nancy Reagan's fans.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's just kind of preposterous to say, oh, you shouldn't do drink or drugs. I know all the great artists did, but trust me, it's not.
Your art will be so much better than all the greats if you don't do drugs.
Exactly. Like, how are you going to argue against the reality, of people's experience? And that's, again, I don't agree with the puritanism of it. All things serve some purpose. Now, some drugs have certainly a greater tendency towards negative results, and alcohol is one of the prime examples of that, which is actually legal in our society. But at the same time, if used in a reasonable way, it opens you up in a certain kind of way. And that's been my experience with writing, too. I mean, I find if I have a combination of a little bit of alcohol and I smoke weed or cannabis or whatever, I just find that I'm so opened up where I just write and I just it resolves the internal editor, I guess, or
Yeah.
the censor.
And for people who choose not to, that's okay too. But as long as we're not judging each other for our choices, that's all I'm about. There could be people who just are, don't need any chemicals at all to be creative. As long as they're not judging me for it, I'm cool with it.
Exactly. I think non-judgment is a fundamental key to the whole thing, and it makes me think of as far as one more thing with John Lilly. He's an important character. A lot of people might not be aware of him, but to me, I mentioned this in the last podcast. To me, the big three of the psychedelic world are Terence McKenna, Timothy Leary, John Lilly. And Terence McKenna has survived into the modern age so much because of the fact that he has so much audio and video. John Lilly and Timothy Leary wrote books, so that kind of doesn't give them the same play, in the world today with the internet. But and that relates to a lot of the things we've been talking about, which is another key concept of John Lilly, where he talks about taking on beliefs and perspectives as if true. So it's not. Don't even get it out of your head, the idea of whether something is or is not true, like objectively. That's not the point at all. You take on beliefs and perspectives as if true, and if you can step back behind that process, then you can analyze, okay, this perspective or this belief, what are the consequences of that? What's the outcome of believing this? And is it positive? Is it negative? What is it? And he talked about that as a method of taking psychedelics and reprogramming, your mind or whatever
Right,
it is.
right.
Especially in a psychedelic experience, you take on a belief. If something presents itself to you, an idea or perspective, you don't have to worry about like, oh, is this objectively true? You just take it on as if true, and then experiment with the outcome or what would that mean if that was true, and then you can step back and judge beliefs and perspectives from a point of view of their actual benefit. For instance, I remember him saying, it's useful to imagine that there are advanced spiritual beings which are beyond yourself and yet are capable of reaching out to you, interacting with you, and guiding you to a higher level spiritually. Now, you can debate whether that's true or not, but if you just imagine that that's true, you open yourself, you open yourself up to the experience as if it were true, and if you have the experience of a higher spiritual being reaching out to you and helping guide you, well, that's probably going to help you out, whether or not it's objectively.
Yeah, that's great. That's the first I've heard of that. That sounds like awesome.
Yeah. John Lilly is a great character. I definitely recommend people go and check him out.
Great.
All right. Well, I appreciate having you on, Curtis. I appreciate you as a guest. I think it went great. I'd like to have you on again sometime. I think there's a lot of things we could talk about that we didn't necessarily get into.
No, it was great. It was great that you invited me. I'm so happy to be part of the new program, and I hope you invite me back. And can't wait to see the new guests that you have coming up. And any of you people in the Terence McKenna group, reach out if you want to be a guest, if you want to help out in some way, or if you have complaints.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know.
And thanks to Ellie for all the technological help making this happen, the coordinating.
That's right. Ellie is doing everything behind the scenes to make this an actual reality. So definitely a lot of appreciation to her. And
just so you guys know, we cut out all the good stuff.
Yeah, when we got too raw, we didn't want to have that. But yeah, definitely. Again, the whole concept of this podcast is that it's over the internet. I mean, again, we don't live anywhere near each other, so it's done over the internet, which means that anyone is a potential guest, and that's the basic idea. So if you have interest in being a guest, let me know. Let us know. Let us know any topics you'd be interested in discussing, and I appreciate any participation from anyone that decides to. So,
it's been a great show. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, thank you. And so I guess this is going to wrap it up. Episode 2 of the Visionary Mind podcast.
Woo!
Later. Yes.